What's the reason?
We got a call, and I assume you're too
A
suspicious.
call for what exactly? What did you personally observe?
Sir, you're under arrest for not cooperating. Hands behind your back.
This is a picnic. You're doing this because I wouldn't just say.
This is why people need to understand their rights before a police encounter gets out of control. Officers surrounded a family during a weekend picnic and acted like they were dealing with a threat, but the father knew exactly how far police authority could legally go. The stop looked routine for about a minute. Then it turned into a serious mistake with witnesses, recordings, and a chain of decisions that would later be impossible to explain away. If you're watching, comment where you're from. If you care about real accountability, when officers push past the law, like the video and subscribe, it happened at a public park in a suburban city on a normal weekend afternoon. Families were spread across the grass. Kids were near the playground. Some people were walking dogs, others were eating lunch, and nothing in the area suggested any kind of danger or disorder. The family at the center of the incident had a blanket, food containers, drinks for the children, and a small speaker playing quietly. The father was helping one child with a kite, while the mother was arranging lunch. Everything about the scene was ordinary. Then several patrol vehicles entered the lot. That already told people nearby this was not being handled as a casual check. When multiple officers arrive at once, the tone changes before anyone even speaks. The officers got out with purpose and walked directly towards the family. They were not scanning the area to figure out what had happened. They were moving as if they had already decided this family was the problem. The reason for the response was a weak complaint dressed up as something more serious. Dispatch had received a suspicious activity call about a family near the playground. The caller claimed the adults were making others uncomfortable and possibly arguing with people in the area. It was vague, and that mattered. Calls like that often reflect bias, exaggeration, or simple annoyance rather than actual criminal conduct. Any officer who arrived and looked at the situation objectively should have recognized that fast. The sergeant who led the contact did not. He focused on the father almost immediately. He did not start with broad questions to find out what had happened. He did not ask nearby park-goers whether there had been any actual disturbance. He approached like he already believed the complaint and only needed the father to confirm it somehow. The father stood up as the officers approached. He kept his hands visible and asked a direct question about what the issue was. The sergeant gave him a vague answer about a complaint and park safety. The father then asked what specific conduct had led to the stop. That should not have been a difficult question. If police are approaching someone based on suspicious activity, they should be able to describe what that suspicious activity actually was. The sergeant did not do that. He stayed general and acted like the request for clarity was itself a problem. The mother stayed close to the children and watched carefully. She was not arguing. She was not interfering. She was trying to keep the situation calm while the officers formed a loose circle around the picnic area. That move changed the scene. What had started as a family outing now looked like a detention in front of strangers. The father asked whether he was free to leave or being detained. That is one of the clearest questions a person can ask in an encounter like this. It forces the officer to define the stop. A professional answer would have narrowed the legal issue right there. Instead, the sergeant avoided the question and told him to step away from the blanket. The father asked again whether he was under lawful detention. The sergeant repeated the command with a sharper tone. That exchange mattered because it showed where the situation was going. The father was trying to establish the legal basis for the encounter. The sergeant was trying to control movement first and explain later. That is where a lot of bad stops start. The officer treats calm questions as defiance and starts escalating because he does not like being challenged. A few people nearby had started watching by then. Some raised their phones and began recording. The father did not perform for them or try to turn the moment into a speech. He stayed focused on the same simple points. Why were they being approached? What specific complaint had been made? Were they being detained? What legal grounds supported it? He kept the questions narrow because narrow questions are hard to bury later in a report. The officers then asked for identification. The father asked what crime they were investigating. Again, there was no clean answer. The sergeant relied on broad phrases about an investigation and the need to cooperate. That kind of wording sounds official, but it often hides the fact that the officer has not established a real basis for the detention. By then, the officers had already seen the family, the food, the children, the blanket, and the lack of any threatening behavior. There was still no visible offense, no disturbance, no sign of intoxication, no aggression, nothing that matched the tone of the response. The mother then raised her phone and began recording openly. The sergeant noticed immediately and warned her not to interfere. She was standing with her children and documenting the stop. That was lawful. Her decision to record made the officers more cautious in some ways, but it also seemed to irritate the sergeant. He was now dealing with a father asking precise legal questions and a mother preserving the entire interaction on video. That combination often exposes sloppy policing in real time. The father repeated his question about whether he was being detained. This time, the sergeant said he was being detained, while officers sorted things out. That sounded procedural, but it was legally weak. Police cannot detain someone just to sort things out unless they can point to facts supporting reasonable suspicion of a crime. The father understood that immediately and asked what specific facts justified the detention. The sergeant did not have a strong answer. He shifted to officer safety language. That was not supported by the scene either. The father had not threatened anyone. He had not reached into pockets, made sudden movements, or tried to leave. He had simply stood near his family and asked lawful questions in a public park. Another officer stepped closer and reached for the father's arm. The mother responded by pulling the children back and keeping the phone trained on the officers. She did not rush forward. She did not create a physical confrontation. She stated clearly that her husband was not resisting and that the stop was being recorded. That was smart. Clear audio from a calm witness often becomes more valuable than the video itself. The father did not pull away or give the officers anything they could later describe as resistance. He let the scene unfold exactly as they were choosing to create it. The officers then placed him in handcuffs in front of his wife, his children, and several people in the park who were already filming. That changed everything. At that point, this was no longer a vague park inquiry. It was now a public detention of a calm father over an unverified suspicious activity complaint that still had not been explained in concrete terms. One of the children started crying. The mother stayed controlled, but it was obvious she was angry and focused. The sergeant kept insisting they were conducting a lawful detention. The problem for him was simple. He had used force and restraints before clearly establishing facts that would justify either. By then, the officers still believed they were in control of the stop. They had not yet understood who the father was, or how well he understood the law. They also had not thought far enough ahead to realize what multiple recordings, witness statements, body camera footage, and dispatch logs were going to look like once those pieces were reviewed together. The sergeant kept acting like pressure would settle the matter. It wouldn't. Once the officers put the father in handcuffs, the stop became much harder to defend. Up to that point, the sergeant could still pretend he was checking a complaint. After the cuffs went on, every decision had to match a real legal basis. That was where the problem started getting serious. If you're watching, comment your city. If you want more stories about bad stops and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. The father stayed calm. He did not argue for effect. He kept asking the same direct questions. Was he under arrest or only detained? What specific crime were they investigating? What facts gave them grounds to handcuff him in front of his family? The sergeant did not answer clearly. He kept using broad phrases about an investigation and officer safety. That was weak. The officers had arrived to a family picnic, not a fight, not a threat, not a crime in progress. The wife kept recording. She said clearly that her husband had not resisted and that officers still had not identified an actual offense. A couple of people nearby recorded from different angles. That mattered because the scene was now documented from several sources, not just police body cams. The sergeant then had another officer move the father away from the blanket and closer to the patrol cars. That made the detention look even worse. The children were already upset, and now they were watching their father being separated from them over a complaint nobody could explain properly. The father kept pressing the same point. He asked whether the detention was based on officer observations, a witness statement, or just his refusal to obey commands that had no clear legal basis. The sergeant had no strong answer. He started talking more, but the content stayed thin. Then one of the officers asked for identification again. This time the father agreed and provided it carefully. The younger officer checked the ID, looked back at the father, then looked at the sergeant. His body language changed immediately. He checked it again to make sure he had read it right. The father was a sitting federal judge. That was the moment the stop changed. The sergeant stepped in, looked at the identification, and understood the situation at once. His tone dropped. His posture changed. He was still trying to look in control, but the confidence was gone. A minute earlier, he had acted like the father was just another person he could pressure. Now he knew the man in handcuffs understood constitutional law better than anyone on scene. The father did not raise his voice. He did not grandstand. He simply laid out the problem. He said they had detained him without clearly stating a crime, handcuffed him without a real safety basis, and treated a lawful family picnic like suspicious conduct because somebody made a vague complaint. He made it clear that discomfort from a caller did not automatically create police authority. The wife kept filming the officers as they reacted. That part was important too. Once police realize who a person is and suddenly change tone, it raises an obvious question later. If the stop was lawful before the identification, why did everything shift after it? The sergeant called for a supervisor. That call came late. It also showed he knew the stop was slipping away from him. The children were still shaken. The younger one was crying. The older one stayed close to the mother and watched everything. The wife then asked whether her husband would have been treated the same way if he had not known the law and if she had not recorded the stop from the start. Nobody answered that. A supervisor arrived a short time later. He took one look at the father in cuffs, the wife filming, the kids upset, and the people nearby recording. He could see this was already bad. The sergeant started explaining, but the explanation was short and it did not sound strong enough for what officers had already done. The father then broke the stop down in plain term: public park, no visible offense, no clear, reasonable suspicion, escalation after lawful questions, handcuffs without a credible safety reason. It was simple and hard to argue with. The supervisor listened, looked at the scene again, and made the only decision left. He ordered the cuffs removed. Once the cuffs came off, the officers lost the argument that this had been a clean detention. Taking the cuffs off that fast did not solve the problem. It showed the problem was real. If you're watching, drop your city in the comments. If you want more stories where bad decisions meet real scrutiny, like the video and subscribe. The supervisor stepped in and tried to slow everything down. He asked the father if he was hurt and said they wanted to sort out what had happened. That was an attempt to regain control of the scene before more damage was done on camera. The father did not let the conversation drift. He kept it focused on the main issue. He said the officers had detained him in a public park without clearly identifying a crime, handcuffed him in front of his wife and children, and escalated after he asked basic legal questions. He kept it simple because simple facts are harder to hide later. The supervisor then asked the sergeant what conduct had justified the detention. That was the question that mattered most. Not what dispatch said, not what a caller felt, what the officers themselves had seen after arriving. The answer was weak. The sergeant referred to the complaint the father's refusal to move when ordered, and general officer safety. None of that sounded strong enough for handcuffs. The father had not threatened anyone. He had not tried to run. He had not acted aggressively. He had stood near his family and asked why police were stopping him. The father then said exactly what the officers did not want said out loud. He said they had turned a vague complaint into a detention first and had started looking for legal justification after that. He said the sequence was obvious. They arrived, focused on his family, escalated, and only then tried to explain it. That was hard to answer because it matched the scene. The wife stepped in next. She asked the supervisor whether all body camera footage would be preserved, whether dispatch audio from the original call would be saved, and whether every officer on scene would be identified in the report. That put the conversation where it belonged, not on feelings, on evidence. The supervisor answered more carefully than the sergeant had. He said the footage would be retained and that the incident would be reviewed. He was speaking like someone who already understood internal affairs was now part of the story. Nearby witnesses were still filming. A few of them had heard enough to understand what had happened. One woman said the father had been calm the whole time. Another witness said the officers had shown up ready to force a problem before they had confirmed there was one. Comments like that matter because they do not come from the family or the department. They come from people with no reason to shape the story for either side. The supervisor then tried to soften the scene by calling it a misunderstanding that escalated too quickly. The father shut that down immediately. He said there had been no misunderstanding on his side. His family had been eating lunch in a public park. Officers arrived and treated that as suspicious without identifying actual unlawful conduct. He said that was not confusion. It was a decision. That distinction mattered. The wife then asked the officers to step back from the children. The supervisor finally told them to widen the space and stop crowding the blanket area. That should have happened much earlier, but it was the first move that actually reduced the pressure around the family. The father then made another point that cut off an easy excuse. He said his title should not matter. He said the stop had to be lawful before the officers knew who he was. That was important because it blocked the department from later framing the case as a special situation involving a prominent person. He was making the opposite point. If the detention was wrong, it was wrong because of what they did to an ordinary family before identification changed the tone. The sergeant had very little to say by then. Earlier, he had controlled the scene. Now he was mostly standing back, while the supervisor handled the fallout. That alone told people a lot. The father requested names, badge numbers, and the incident reference. He also made it clear that dispatch logs, body camera footage, and witness recordings would all matter later. He was not threatening anyone. He was telling them what was obviously coming next. The supervisor gave a short apology for the distress caused. The father did not debate it. He said the department would have a chance to address the stop through formal channels. That answer told the officers this was not ending with a sidewalk apology and a quiet departure. The family packed their things slowly and kept recording until they were ready to leave. That was smart. The stop may have ended, but the evidence gathering had not. By the time they walked away, the officers were no longer dealing with a field contact. They were dealing with a record. After the family left, the park incident moved out of the field and into the system. That was where the officers had a bigger problem. Out in public, they could rely on tone, positioning, and vague commands. In review, none of that helps. Review looks at sequence, legal basis, footage, radio traffic, and written reports. The stop was weak on all of it. If you're watching, comment your city. If you want more real stories about accountability, when authority gets abused, like the video, subscribe, and stay with the channel. The first issue was the call itself. Dispatch records showed a vague, suspicious activity complaint, not a report of violence, theft, threats, or trespassing. That already made the aggressive response look excessive. Then the body camera footage made things worse. The officers arrived to a family picnic, saw no obvious crime, got lawful questions from the father, and escalated anyway. That sequence is hard to defend because it shows the detention grew out of assumption, not clear facts. The second problem was the handcuffing. Once the father was restrained, the department needed a clear explanation for why officers believed that level of force was necessary. The footage did not show aggression. It did not show resistance. It did not show an immediate safety threat. It showed a calm father asking what law he had broken while standing near his wife and children. The third problem was the timing of the tone shift. Multiple recordings captured the same pattern. Before identification, the sergeant acted forceful and dismissive. After officers realized the father was a sitting federal judge, the tone changed fast. That did not help the department at all. It made the scene look exactly like what the family later alleged. Officers were comfortable pushing past legal limits until they realized the person in cuffs had the knowledge and position to hold them accountable. The family filed a formal complaint quickly. They did not rely on public outrage alone. They preserved the videos, identified witnesses, requested records, and built the case the right way. The complaint focused on unlawful detention, improper use of restraints, unequal treatment in a public space, and the failure to articulate reasonable suspicion before escalating. It also pointed to the emotional impact on the children, which mattered because departments often try to treat family harm as secondary when it is part of the real damage. Then came the legal side. The father's team prepared a federal civil rights action against the department and the officers involved. The claim was straightforward. Police cannot detain and restrain people in a public park over a vague complaint without specific facts supporting the stop. They also cannot turn lawful questions into justification for escalation. The family argued that the officers acted first and searched for legal cover afterward. Based on the sequence, that claim had weight. Internal Affairs opened an investigation. The sergeant was placed on administrative leave, while footage reports and dispatch records were reviewed. Another officer on scene was removed from field duty during the inquiry. The supervisor was not accused of causing the stop, but his response became part of the review because investigators wanted to know why supervisory intervention happened only after the detention had already gone bad. The department tried the usual public language at first. They said they take all complaints seriously. They said the matter was under review. They said they are committed to professional policing. That kind of statement buys time, but it does not fix footage. Then more facts came out. Witness statements supported the family's account. Video angles matched each other. The timeline was consistent. The father had asked clear legal questions. The officers had failed to identify a concrete offense before using handcuffs. The children had been present the entire time. The tone shift after identification was obvious. By that point, the department was no longer deciding whether the stop looked bad. It was deciding how much damage it could contain. The sergeant's employment did not survive it. He was terminated after the review concluded that the detention was not supported by a properly articulated legal basis and that his escalation decisions violated department policy. The termination was not presented as a political sacrifice. It was framed as a policy and judgment failure. That wording mattered because it meant the department could not defend the stop on the merits. The father later made a public statement, and it cut directly to the issue. He said his title was never the point. The Constitution was supposed to protect his family before the officers knew who he was. He said the real question was how many families without recordings, witnesses, or legal knowledge had already been treated the same way and never managed to prove it. That statement landed because it turned the story from one family's case into a broader indictment of how vague complaints and officer assumption can become unlawful detention. The case also pushed for reform. The family called for stricter detention review standards, mandatory body camera preservation in all public contact complaints, and better training on reasonable suspicion, public space enforcement, and recording rights. Those reforms were not abstract. They were tied directly to what happened in the park. For viewers, the lesson is simple. Stay calm. Ask if you are being detained. Ask what law officers believe applies. Do not physically resist. Record if local law allows it. Keep your hands visible. Try to get badge numbers, unit numbers, witnesses, and timestamps. Do not argue in circles. Make officers define their actions clearly. That helps in the moment, and it helps even more later. This case started with a family eating lunch in a park. It turned into a detention because officers treated discomfort and assumption like legal authority. Then the entire thing collapsed once the facts had to stand on their own. That is how bad stops unravel. Not because officers suddenly become honest, because footage, timing, and clear facts leave them nowhere to hide. If you want more stories about abuse of authority, legal accountability, and the moments where power flips back to the people who know their rights, subscribe and stay with the channel.
Hands up, don't move. Who are you and what are you doing out here?
I'm waiting on someone. Why you
You're
ask?
stalling. You're acting like you got something to hide.
I'm acting like a normal person who waits for something.
You're in cuffs until I figure you out.
You just did damage you can't undo.
What happens when a high-stakes narcotic sting is ruined not by a criminal but by a fellow officer? A patrol cop let bias take over, targeted a black undercover FBI agent, and exposed him in the middle of an active operation. This was not a small mistake. It wrecked a federal case, put an agent in danger, and turned into the kind of lawsuit that ends careers. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about abuse of power, getting exposed and punished, like the video and subscribe. This one deserves your attention. The man at the center of it was FBI Special Agent Andre Carson. At the moment everything went wrong, Carson was sitting in a gray sedan near a line of warehouse units on the south side of the city. He had been undercover for months inside a narcotics network that moved fentanyl and cocaine across county lines. That night was supposed to be the final step before takedowns. A controlled buy was underway. Surveillance teams were in place. Local narcotics units were monitoring. Federal agents were waiting for the deal to move far enough to lock in the larger case. Then Officer Brett Hollis saw Carson's car and decided he had found his own stop. Hollis was a patrol officer, not part of the task force. He was the kind of officer who wanted activity on every shift and attention after every arrest. Supervisors liked his numbers. They ignored the complaints that followed him. Most of those complaints came from black drivers who said he escalated too fast, acted like suspicion was proof, and treated every stop like a personal challenge. Nothing serious had stuck to him yet. That made him even more confident. The operation had strict instructions that night. Marked patrol units were supposed to stay out of the area unless command requested them. Dispatch had already told patrol supervisors that sensitive law enforcement activity was happening around the warehouse corridor. Officers were not supposed to start random stops there. The reason was simple. One marked cruiser in the wrong place could kill the whole case. Hollis still inserted himself. He saw Carson's sedan moving slowly off the service road behind the warehouses and called it in. The plate came back clean. There was no warrant, no stolen hit, no urgent alert. He kept following anyway. He later claimed the driver looked nervous and out of place. That explanation fell apart later because Bodycam and dispatch logs showed he had nothing concrete when he decided to act. Carson noticed the patrol vehicle almost immediately. He could not handle the stop the way an ordinary federal agent would. Two vehicles connected to the target group were still nearby. One sat near the loading area. Another was parked farther back with a clear view of the access road. Carson had spent months building credibility with men who trusted nobody. If they saw him openly identify himself to police, the case was finished. If they thought he was cooperating with law enforcement, the danger would go far beyond a failed arrest plan. When Hollis activated his lights, Carson had no good option. He pulled into an open section of pavement and stopped. He kept his movements controlled and visible. He tried to speak in a way that would alert a trained officer without exposing himself to the suspects who were still close enough to watch. He used phrases that should have made Hollis pause and reassess. He tried to slow the stop down. Hollis did the opposite. He came out hard and treated the scene like a felony takedown. He shouted commands, closed distance too quickly, and pointed his weapon at Carson before he had any real understanding of what he was interrupting. His body cam later showed that he was not investigating by that point. He had already decided what Carson was supposed to be. That decision mattered. Carson was a black man in an unmarked sedan in an industrial corridor after dark. Hollis saw that and built the rest in his own head. He did not see the operation. He did not see the possibility that another officer might be working. He did not see the tactical signs that the area was under active surveillance. He saw somebody he wanted to dominate in public. Carson tried again to get him to slow down. He told him, carefully, that this stop was creating a serious problem. He tried to direct Hollis toward checking with a supervisor. He avoided anything that would fully blow his cover in front of the men watching from nearby. Hollis took that as defiance. This is where officers like him become dangerous. They stop listening because they think control is the same thing as being right. Once that switch flips, everything becomes non-compliance. Every word becomes attitude. Every hesitation becomes guilt. Inside the command post, people were already realizing what was happening. Lieutenant Elena Ruiz, who was coordinating the local side of the task force, heard the traffic and knew a patrol officer had drifted into the middle of a sealed operation. She ordered dispatch to stop the contact. A patrol supervisor repeated the order. The message reached Hollis. He did not disengage. That point destroyed his defense later. He was not acting in confusion. He had been told to back off and kept going. At the same time, the drug deal was coming apart. The target group did not need a full explanation. They only needed to see their supposed buyer pinned down in headlights by a marked officer. One vehicle started moving out of the lot. Another cut away from the warehouse side and headed toward the main road. Surveillance units called out movement over the radio. Within seconds, the controlled buy was dead. Carson was still trying to manage two disasters at once. He had to survive an aggressive stop without giving the suspects a clean answer about who he was. Hollis kept pressing. He ordered Carson out of the vehicle. He ignored the warning signs in front of him. He ignored command. He ignored the possibility that he was about to destroy months of work. Then he got close enough to see equipment under Carson's jacket line. A careful officer would have paused there. Carson was not carrying himself like a street dealer. His setup did not match the picture Hollis had created. That should have forced a reset. Hollis doubled down instead. That is what pride looks like, when a man realizes he may be wrong but refuses to admit it. He escalated because backing off would have meant admitting he had made a bad stop. He cared more about winning the moment than understanding it. By then, the suspects had seen enough. The buyer they had been testing for months was now being treated like a criminal by uniformed police. Carson knew the case was gone. He also knew his face, his vehicle, and his value as an undercover agent were probably gone with it. Hollis moved in to put him in cuffs. That was the moment a patrol officer destroyed a federal narcotics operation, exposed a fellow law enforcement officer, and started the chain of events that would end his career. Hollis pulled Andre Carson out of the sedan and forced him onto the pavement while the operation died around them. That was the real damage. Not just the handcuffs, not just the public humiliation. The suspects were watching a man they believed was a drug buyer get handled by uniformed police like he was dirty. In undercover work, that kind of scene does not create confusion. It creates certainty. Carson was burned. The surveillance team reported the first exit almost immediately. One target vehicle left through the rear access road. A second moved toward the highway. Then the communications line got worse. The primary seller had stopped answering. The courier phone went dark. A spotter vehicle that had been sitting 2 buildings over disappeared. Months of work started collapsing in less than a minute. Carson was on the ground trying to protect what little he still could. He told Hollis as carefully as he could under the circumstances that he was interfering with an active law enforcement matter. He told him to get a supervisor to the scene. He tried to keep his words narrow because every extra detail made things worse if the suspects were still close enough to hear. Hollis kept pushing. His body cam later showed the problem clearly. He was not controlling a dangerous suspect. He was performing authority. He repeated commands Carson was already trying to follow. He spoke over him. He treated every attempt to slow the encounter as resistance. That is what made the footage so bad for the department later. The tone did not look professional, it looked personal. Then Lieutenant Elena Ruiz arrived. She came in fast, identified Carson, and ordered the cuffs off immediately. The recording captured the moment Hollis realized he had stopped the wrong man. He did not switch into concern. He did not ask what he had interrupted. He did what officers like him always do first. He defended himself. He said Carson had been suspicious. He said he was doing his job. He said nobody told him enough. That excuse was already dead. Dispatch logs showed he had been warned before the stop got aggressive. Radio audio showed a supervisor telling him to disengage. The task force command channel had already flagged the area as sensitive. Hollis had all the information he needed to back off. He chose not to. Ruiz was not subtle about what had just happened. She told him he had blown an active operation. She told him targets were already fleeing. She told him to stop talking and get out of the way. Carson got to his feet, but the damage was done. The men he had spent months getting close to were gone. So was the case structure built around him. That night should have ended with coordinated arrests, sealed evidence, and search warrants. It ended with frantic recovery work. Teams tried to pick up what they could. Highway units searched for vehicles that had already split in different directions. Surveillance reviewed last known movements. Analysts started freezing numbers tied to the target phones. None of it fixed the core problem. Leon Voss, the main target, had been cautious for years. Once he saw signs that law enforcement pressure had touched his circle, he adapted fast. By sunrise, stash locations were being cleared out. Burner phones were gone. One rented warehouse was emptied before a warrant team could get to it. The task force did not just lose a buy. They lost momentum, access, leverage, and the one undercover lane that had gotten them inside the organization. Carson paid the price first. He went straight from the scene into debriefing. Federal supervisors needed to know what the suspects had seen, what names had been used, what locations were now compromised, and whether he could safely stay in the field. The answer was obvious. He was done undercover in that case, probably done in that region for a long time. His face had been exposed in the worst possible context. Not as a police officer in a planned takedown, as a man being detained by uniformed patrol in front of criminals. People outside that work never understand how much that costs. An undercover identity is not a jacket you put on and take off. It takes months to build, sometimes longer. One careless patrol stop can wipe out years of credibility in one shot. Carson was furious, but not sloppy. He gave a clean statement. He documented every warning he had tried to give Hollis. He identified the exact point where the suspects would have understood the operation was compromised. He also made clear that this was not random bad luck. Hollis had no legal reason to force that stop into a takedown. He acted on an assumption, then escalated because he did not want to be challenged. Inside the local department, the reaction split almost immediately. The narcotics people were livid. They knew what had been lost. They had spent months supporting that case, coordinating with federal agents, and waiting for the operation to mature. To them, Hollis was the guy who stormed onto a chessboard, knocked over the pieces, and then acted like he deserved credit for showing initiative. Patrol leadership took a different tone. They started softening the language before the first reports were even finalized. The phrase they liked was miscommunication. That word showed up fast, too fast. It gave them cover. Miscommunication sounds procedural. It sounds shared. It spreads blame across the room. It avoids the real question, which was why Hollis saw a black man in an unmarked car and rushed to treat him like a felony suspect, even after multiple warnings told him to stop. Carson noticed that shift immediately. He also noticed something worse. Some people wanted him to help bury it. He was told the department needed time to review the evidence. He was told interagency relationships mattered. He was told everybody on the law enforcement side needed to avoid emotional reactions. That kind of language always means the same thing. They want the injured person to stay calm while the institution builds its escape route. Carson did not play along, but he was still boxed in for the moment. He had to protect federal procedures. He had to wait for official reviews. He had to sit through meetings where people talked about communication breakdowns instead of saying what happened plainly. A patrol officer ignored orders, profiled the wrong man, and wrecked an active operation. That was the truth. Everybody in the room knew it. Some were just more willing than others to say it. Then the footage started getting reviewed in full. That changed the temperature. Because once command saw the body cam next to dispatch audio and task force logs, the story got harder to smooth over. Hollis had not walked into a confusing scene and made an understandable mistake. He had driven the stop with his own ego from the beginning. He had been warned. He had been corrected. He had kept going. And there was one more problem for him. This was not his first complaint. The evidence killed the department's excuse. Once command reviewed the body cam with the dispatch logs and task force timeline, the story changed. Hollis had no traffic stop to justify what he did. No warrant hit, no emergency. He picked Carson, escalated fast, and ignored orders to stop. Then they checked his history. His prior stop showed the same pattern. Black drivers, aggressive tone. Thin reasons for the stop. Complaints that went nowhere. Supervisors had seen enough over the years to know he was a problem. They kept him on the street anyway. The department still tried to protect itself. Internal Affairs drafted a summary calling it a communication failure during a complex operation. That wording was not accidental. It spread blame around and took the focus off Hollis. Carson rejected it immediately. He told federal supervisors the stop was not caused by confusion between agencies. It started with profiling. Everything after that came from Hollis refusing to back off. The local department stalled. Hollis was pulled from patrol, but not fired. Command delayed decisions, meetings piled up, reports got rewritten. Nobody wanted to be the one who said the plain truth in writing. A patrol officer had racially profiled a black FBI agent, ruined an undercover case, and ignored direct warnings while doing it. Carson also got pushed aside. He was taken off field work connected to the case. Officially, they said his cover was burned and his safety had to come first. That part was true. The other truth was simpler. He had become a liability for people trying to keep the scandal contained. The narcotics case collapsed for good in the weeks after the stop. Leon Voss disappeared. Phones went dead. One storage site was cleared out before a warrant team reached it. Informants stopped calling back. The task force did not lose one transaction. They lost the case structure they had spent months building. That loss had a price. The failed sting burned surveillance work, overtime, informant payments, technical resources, and seizure plans. The cost climbed into the millions once the city counted wasted case development and the lawsuit risk that followed. Then Carson made the move that ended any chance of a quiet cleanup. He hired civil rights attorney Dana Mercer. Mercer treated the case exactly the way the department feared. Not as one bad stop, as a chain of misconduct, profiling, operational recklessness, supervisory failure, cover-up language after the fact. She moved fast. She demanded body cam, CAD logs, radio traffic, briefing records, stop data, prior complaints, training files, and internal drafts. She wanted to know what Hollis knew, when he knew it, and why the department kept softening the language. Depositions made it worse. Supervisors had to explain why Hollis stayed engaged after being told to disengage. Internal Affairs had to explain why early reports avoided the profiling issue. Command staff had to answer for years of ignored warning signs in Hollis's record. Hollis stuck to the same defense. He said Carson looked suspicious. He said he acted decisively in a dangerous area. That did not hold up because the recording showed he kept escalating after he had reasons to stop. Then he gave the answer that finished him. During sworn testimony, Hollis said he thought Carson was trying to manipulate the stop the way offenders often do. That line exposed the whole mindset. He had already placed Carson into a category before he knew who he was. After that, everything Carson said was filtered through that assumption. By that point, the city understood it had a serious problem. The stop could no longer be explained away as a patrol mistake. The record showed pattern. The footage showed escalation. The transcript showed ignored warnings. Carson had the evidence, the discipline, and the lawyer to force all of it into the open. And now the department had to decide whether it wanted to keep protecting Hollis or save itself. The city did not defend Hollis all the way through trial because the evidence was too bad. The body cam hurt him. The dispatch records hurt him more. The task force logs made it worse. He had been told to disengage and stayed in the stop anyway. That point never went away. The lawsuit ended in a major settlement. Carson's legal team argued that the stop cost him more than public humiliation. It destroyed months of undercover work, damaged his future operational use in that region, and put him at risk in front of narcotics targets. The city understood a jury would not like that story. A black FBI agent gets profiled by a local patrol officer. A federal case gets wrecked. And then the department tries to call it miscommunication. That was not a trial they wanted, so they paid. The exact number became a headline because it was large enough to embarrass everyone involved. Bigger than most people expected. Big enough that local media stopped treating the case like an internal dispute and started calling it what it was, a preventable disaster. Hollis did not survive it. First, he was suspended. Then the department moved to terminate him. His past complaints came back into the record. His stop history got reviewed in full. His sworn testimony made him look worse, not better. He had no strong defense left. He lost his job. And after that, he lost his law enforcement certification. That was the real end. Getting fired is one thing. Losing certification means the career is dead. His supervisors did not walk away clean either. 2 command staff members were forced out after the report language, and delayed response came under review. Internal Affairs took heat for trying to soften the facts. Patrol leadership got hammered for years of ignored warning signs in Hollis's record. The department had spent too long protecting a problem officer because his numbers looked good on paper. That habit got expensive. Carson never got the case back. Leon Voss stayed gone long enough to break the operation for good. Other investigators eventually picked pieces of the network apart through separate cases, but the original federal sting was finished the night Hollis made that stop. Months of work were gone. Carson's cover was gone. That part could not be repaired by any settlement. What Carson did get was public vindication. He refused to let the department write the story for him. That mattered. A lot of officers are told to stay quiet for the sake of agency relationships or the chain of command. Carson went the other way. He documented everything, challenged the false narrative early, and forced the city to answer for what happened. Without that, Hollis probably gets a short suspension. The department buries the language, and everybody moves on. After the case, the department changed policy because it had to. Patrol officers got tighter restrictions around active federal and task force zones. Dispatch procedures changed. Mandatory verification steps were added before self-initiated stops near protected operations. Bias review on stop data got more serious because the city could no longer pretend that pattern complaints were random. Supervisors also lost some discretion to ignore repeated conduct flags from officers with aggressive histories. That was the only useful thing left to do. Admit the old system failed and lock some of those doors. The story stuck because the irony was brutal. A narcotics sting aimed at a drug network didn't collapse because the suspects outplayed investigators. It collapsed because one patrol officer saw a black man, trusted his own bias more than command, and thought the badge on his chest protected him from being wrong. It did not. It cost him his job. It cost him his certification. It cost the city millions. It exposed the department's instincts when one of their own caused the damage. And it proved something people keep learning the hard way. Ego inside a uniform can be just as dangerous as the threat officers claim they are stopping. That was the end of Brett Hollis as a cop. And for Andre Carson, the win was not clean, but it was real. He did not get his case back. He did not get those months back. He did get the truth on record, and he made sure the man who burned him could not hide behind the badge again. What would you have done in Carson's position? Stayed quiet or forced it into the open? Put your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who thinks abuse inside law enforcement never gets punished. And subscribe for more stories like this. Police overreach keeps getting defended right up until the footage is too clear to spin. In this case, a patrol stop turned into a career-ending mistake when one officer pushed past the law, ignored valid documents, and picked the wrong driver to test. What made this one different was simple. The man behind the wheel wasn't just another citizen trying to get home. He was the head of internal affairs in the same department, and the officer had no idea. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about police misconduct, civil rights, and real accountability, like and subscribe. Cases like this matter because most abuse of power only gets taken seriously when the evidence is impossible to hide. The stop started early evening on a busy city corridor near restaurants and office buildings. The vehicle was a dark Lamborghini Urus. The driver was Andre Bennett, black, early 40s, off-duty, dressed in a polo and slacks after a private business dinner. He wasn't speeding through traffic or drawing attention to himself. He was just driving an expensive SUV through the wrong part of town in the eyes of the officer who saw him. That officer was Tyler Voss. The moment Voss pulled in behind the Urus, the stop stopped being about traffic. He had already decided the driver didn't fit the vehicle. Everything after that came from that assumption. He approached the window and mentioned a traffic reason for the stop, but he didn't stay on it. His focus shifted right to the SUV and to Andre. He asked for license, registration, and insurance. Andre handed everything over without delay. The documents were valid. The vehicle was registered correctly. Insurance was active. The license matched. There was nothing unusual in the paperwork. Voss didn't accept that. He started asking ownership questions that had nothing to do with a normal stop. He wanted to know whose vehicle it really was, how long Andre had it, what he did for work, where he had been, and why he was driving in that area. He wasn't checking facts tied to the stop. He was looking for a crack somewhere else. Andre stayed calm. He answered what he had to answer and didn't give Voss more than the stop required. He knew the difference between a traffic inquiry and a fishing expedition. He also knew that once an officer stopped looking at the documents and started looking for a story, the encounter could turn fast. Voss went back to his cruiser and ran the information. Nothing supported his suspicion. The SUV wasn't stolen. Andre had no warrant. His license was clear. The insurance checked out. Registration was current. The stop should have ended there with a citation or a warning, depending on the original reason. Voss came back more aggressive. That told the whole story. He had checked the facts, and the facts had failed him. Instead of accepting that, he started trying to force the stop in another direction. He questioned Andre again as if the same valid documents had somehow become less valid in the last 2 minutes. He spoke like the paperwork itself was suspicious because it didn't match his assumption. He kept asking about money, work, and ownership. He treated a legal luxury vehicle like it was evidence by itself. Andre didn't react. That made Voss more confident. Officers like that often read self-control as weakness. They think calm means they can keep leaning. So Voss kept leaning. By then, people nearby had started paying attention. Traffic had slowed. A man waiting in a parked rideshare across the street began recording with his phone. A couple on the sidewalk slowed down when they saw Voss staying at the driver's window longer than a normal stop would require. Voss either didn't notice or didn't care. Andre still didn't tell him who he was. He wanted to see the stop for what it really was, not what it would become once rank entered the scene. If Voss was willing to do this to a driver with valid documents, then Andre had no reason to rescue him from his own choices. Voss asked for consent to search the vehicle. Andre refused. Clean refusal, no argument, no speech, just a lawful no. That should have settled it. Refusal to consent is not probable cause. Any officer knows that. Voss knew it too. He just didn't want the stop to end without proving himself right. His tone changed. He started using broad, weak language that sounds official until someone checks it. He mentioned officer safety. He hinted that Andre was being evasive. He suggested there were inconsistencies, but he couldn't point to one that mattered. He was building the usual excuse stack officers use when they want more authority than the law gives them. Andre asked the right question. He asked whether Voss had legal grounds for anything beyond the traffic stop. Voss didn't answer it directly. He ordered Andre out of the vehicle. Andre complied. He stepped out, closed the door, and stood where Voss directed him. He didn't give him attitude. He didn't make sudden movements. He didn't help him either. He simply followed the order and watched Voss keep pushing the stop past its limit. Voss continued asking questions that had already been answered. He implied there might be something illegal inside the SUV. He still had no clear basis for that claim. No odor, no contraband in plain view, no conflicting documents, no admission, no alert from a K9, no specific fact that could support probable cause. He searched anyway. That was the decision that ended him. He moved into the vehicle without a lawful basis and started going through the interior as if he only needed to find one thing afterward to justify everything before it. That's not how the law works, and it's not how review boards look at stops once the video gets pulled. Andre told him the search was unlawful and requested a supervisor. Voss kept going. At that point, the stop was no longer a judgment call. It was misconduct on camera. The Bodycam captured Voss ignoring valid documents, stretching the stop, and treating refusal to consent like a reason to search. The dashcam captured the timeline. The bystander's phone video captured the tone from outside the car, which made the whole thing look worse. Voss had turned a routine stop into a personal challenge, and he was doing it in front of multiple cameras. Andre still did not reveal his position. Voss thought he was dealing with a driver he could pressure until something gave way. He had no idea he was minutes away from standing in front of the man who supervised internal misconduct investigations for the department. That reveal hadn't happened yet. The search came first. That was the part Voss would never be able to fix. Tyler Voss had already made the mistake that mattered. The unlawful search was on camera. Everything after that only made the fallout worse. Andre Bennett stood near the SUV and watched Voss keep moving through the interior like he could still rescue the stop by finding something. He checked the center console, looked through the front compartment areas, kept going long after it was obvious he was working backward from suspicion instead of forward from facts. Andre repeated that he wanted a supervisor. This time, Voss responded like a man getting irritated that the scene was no longer fully under his control. He still acted like he had time, like he could finish the search, lock in a report, and shape the story before anyone important showed up. That was his next bad read. A field supervisor, Lieutenant Elena Strickland, pulled up within minutes. She arrived expecting a routine assist on a traffic stop that had gotten tense. That changed fast. She saw Andre outside the vehicle, saw Voss still operating with too much heat, and saw the Lamborghini sitting open in a way that immediately raised the wrong questions. She asked Voss for the basis of the search. He gave her exactly the kind of answer that falls apart on review. He mentioned suspicious behavior. claimed the driver was evasive, referred to vague indicators. He spoke in generic language because generic language was all he had. He did not point to one clean fact that could justify entering the vehicle without consent. Strickland asked about the documents. Valid. She asked whether dispatch had returned anything on the vehicle or driver. Negative. She asked whether there was odor, contraband in plain view, a weapon concern, a warrant issue, or a canine alert. None. That was the moment the stop started collapsing in real time. Andre then gave his name in full. Not just the name on the license, his full department identity. He told Strickland he was Commander Andre Bennett, head of internal affairs. That landed exactly the way it should have. Strickland's expression changed first, not dramatic, just immediate. She knew what it meant, not because rank gave Andre special rights. It meant the department now had an off-duty command officer standing at the side of the road, directly alleging an unlawful search, with Bodycam rolling and at least one civilian recording from across the street. Voss froze for a second. That was the first honest moment he'd had all night. He realized he had not been controlling the stop. He had been documenting his own misconduct. Andre still didn't raise his voice. He didn't pull rank to threaten anyone. He didn't grandstand for the bystanders. He kept it clean. He stated that he had provided valid documents, denied consent, asked whether legal grounds existed for extending the stop, and then watched Voss search the vehicle anyway. He said the stop needed to be preserved exactly as it was, including all body cam, dash cam, radio traffic, and supervisor response times. That was a very bad sentence for Voss to hear, because now the scene had moved out of roadside argument territory and into evidence preservation. Strickland immediately told Voss to step back from the SUV. He tried to defend himself, claimed Andre's behavior raised red flags, claimed his training told him something was off, claimed he believed further investigation was justified. The problem was obvious. Belief wasn't enough, not for a search, not when every objective point had already cleared. The car was legal, the documents were legal, the driver was legal. Voss had turned a personal suspicion into police action and expected the uniform to carry him through the gap. It didn't. Strickland looked at Andre and asked one key question. Had there been consent at any point? Andre said no. That answer shut the door. The bystander across the street was still recording. A second person had started filming too. People didn't know who Andre was yet, but they knew what they were looking at. An officer had kept pushing a stop that didn't make sense, and a supervisor had just shown up to find him halfway inside a vehicle with no clear legal basis. Strickland then did what Voss should have expected from the beginning. She separated the scene. She directed another responding officer to remain with Andre. She pulled Voss aside. She asked for a direct timeline, not a speech. Why the stop started, what was observed, what facts developed, what specific legal threshold he believed he had met before entering the vehicle. His answers got worse when shortened. That happens a lot. Officers who lean on inflated reports usually sound stronger when they can bury weak facts under pages of wording. On scene with a supervisor asking short questions, the weakness shows immediately. What traffic violations started the stop? Minor and unclear. Minor. What developed after contact? Nothing concrete. What contradicted the documents? Nothing. What created probable cause? He could not say it cleanly because there was nothing clean to say. Andre stayed where he was and let the scene keep unfolding. He didn't need to help Voss fail. Voss was already doing that by himself. Strickland asked whether Voss had notified a supervisor before the search. He had not. Asked whether he sought consent more than once after the refusal. He had. Asked whether he documented any independent, articulable fact before entering the vehicle. He had not. That sequence mattered. It showed the real pattern. Voss had not discovered cause. He had tried to manufacture it. By then, another unit arrived. Then another supervisor. The stop had become a command issue. Not because Andre wanted theater, because the department now had exposure on multiple fronts at once: possible civil rights violation, improper search, improper detention, false or inflated reporting risk, prior roadside footage from civilians. And one more problem nobody had spoken aloud yet. If Voss had done this with cameras everywhere, what had he done on stops with fewer witnesses? Andre finally gave Strickland the part that changed this from bad to catastrophic. He said he wanted all prior complaint history on Voss preserved and reviewed with the footage from the stop before anyone accepted a field explanation at face value. That hit because it told Strickland two things at once. First, Andre was not treating this like a personal insult. He was treating it like pattern misconduct. Second, there was a decent chance Voss already had a history. Voss heard that too. You could tell because his posture changed. The roadside confidence was gone. He stopped sounding like a patrol officer defending a hard call and started sounding like a man realizing the department might already know more about him than the scene itself showed. Strickland removed him from the active stop. Not suspended on the spot, not yet, but functionally done for the night. Another officer took over the scene documentation. Strickland informed Andre that the vehicle would not be touched further. She confirmed all video would be preserved. She requested command notification. She requested a formal administrative response. Andre gave one calm answer. He said that was the correct step. That was probably the worst part for Voss. Andre never gave him anger he could point to later. Never gave him a heated exchange to hide behind. The entire record showed one man staying controlled and another man pushing authority past the law because he didn't like what the driver represented. Before Andre left the scene, Strickland asked one final procedural question for the report. Did he intend to file a formal complaint? Andre told her this was already beyond a complaint. This was now an integrity review. That sentence finished the roadside part of the story. Because once internal affairs gets involved as a formal integrity matter, the officer's report is no longer the backbone of the case. The footage is. And the footage was terrible for Tyler Voss. The roadside part was over. The real damage started when the department pulled the footage and matched it against Tyler Voss's paperwork. That review moved fast. Not because the department suddenly cared about every bad stop. Departments rarely move that fast without pressure. This one moved because the victim was the head of internal affairs. The stop was captured from 3 angles, and the legal problem was obvious before anyone even wrote a summary memo. By the next morning, command staff had the body camera, dash cam, dispatch log, and the bystander video. They also had Voss's initial report. That report did not help him. He tried the usual repair job. He wrote that the driver's behavior raised suspicion. He claimed there were inconsistencies during the stop. He suggested the search followed developing indicators. On paper, he tried to make the encounter sound fluid and justified. On video, none of that held up. The footage showed Andre Bennett handing over valid documents right away. It showed no meaningful contradiction in his answers. It showed a calm refusal to consent. It showed Voss staying on the stop long after the traffic issue should have been resolved. Most important, it showed the search happening without any clear legal trigger. That alone was bad enough. Then Internal Affairs pulled Voss's complaint history. That changed the case from a single bad stop to a pattern. He had already been warned. Not once. More than once. The earlier complaints were not identical, but they all leaned the same way. Aggressive tone during routine stops, weak justification for prolonging contact, searches that pushed past the edge of lawful basis, drivers saying he treated them like suspects first and citizens second. In a lot of departments, that kind of record gets shrugged off until someone gets sued or a video goes public. This time, the department had both risk and proof sitting in the same file. Andre didn't personally run the review. That would have been sloppy and easy to attack later. He recused himself from direct handling and let the case move through formal channels. That mattered. It kept Voss from pretending this was personal retaliation. It wasn't. It was a misconduct case with unusually clean evidence. The review team started with the timeline. Why was the vehicle stopped? The original traffic basis was weak, but not the main problem. What happened after first contact? Valid license, valid registration, valid insurance. No warrant, no stolen vehicle return, no objective sign of criminal activity. What justified the extension of the stop? Nothing solid. What justified the search? Nothing lawful. That was the center of it. Once those answers were locked in, everything around Voss's report started looking worse. His wording wasn't just stretched, it looked engineered. He used broad phrases that officers use when they want discretion without facts. Training and experience, nervous behavior, inconsistent responses, officer safety concerns, suspicious circumstances. Those phrases can matter when they connect to actual observations. Here they were cover language. The video stripped them down. Command staff noticed something else. Voss's report sounded cleaner than the scene looked. That's always a bad sign. On camera, he looked irritated early and committed to escalation fast. In the report, he tried to sound measured. That gap matters in an administrative case because it suggests consciousness of guilt. He knew the stop looked bad, so he wrote around it. Then the bystander video made it even worse. Body camera footage often favors the officer by design. It sits on the officer's chest, captures what he faces, and misses how he looks to everyone else. The bystander angle gave the department the outside view. It showed how long Voss kept Andre at the roadside. It showed how often he stayed in Andre's space. It showed the search as something that did not follow a sudden discovery or emergency. It looked exactly like what it was. A patrol officer forcing a stop further and further because he couldn't accept being wrong. Once that angle got added, the department lost whatever room it had to soften the event. The legal office got involved next. That was predictable. A bad stop is one problem. A bad stop on a command officer with multiple video angles, prior complaints, and a weak report is a lawsuit package. Even if Andre chose not to sue, the department had to act like outside counsel might see every frame. They reviewed exposure for unlawful detention, unlawful search, and false statements in reporting. Voss was interviewed under administrative procedure. That interview went badly. He was asked to identify the exact point where the stop developed from traffic enforcement into criminal suspicion. He could not pin it down. He was asked what specific fact overrode the valid documents. He had no good answer. He was asked why refusal to consent seemed to change his behavior. He denied that it had, but the footage said otherwise. He was asked why he searched without calling for a canine, without waiting for a supervisor, and without a clear probable cause statement on audio first. That sequence trapped him. If he claimed urgency, the video did not support urgency. If he claimed probable cause, he could not articulate it. If he claimed officer safety, Andre had been compliant the entire time. Every route out closed on him. Then the prior incidents came back into the room. Investigators asked about earlier complaints where drivers described the same pattern. Routine stop, quick suspicion, repeated questioning after documents cleared, pressure for consent, search logic that didn't match the facts. Voss tried to separate each case. That didn't work. Pattern cases are built exactly that way. One incident can look messy. 4 similar incidents look intentional. By mid-review, command wasn't deciding whether Voss had a future. They were deciding how to contain the fallout. That's the part a lot of people don't understand. Departments will tolerate bad judgment for a long time. They stop tolerating it when the officer becomes impossible to defend. Tyler Voss had crossed that line. He had weak facts, bad video, prior warnings, and a report that collapsed under comparison. No chief wants to stand in front of city leadership, local media, or a civil jury and explain why that officer was still on the street. Andre stayed mostly out of public view while the review moved. He gave his statement. Preserve the evidence issue. Let the process work. That also made him harder to attack. Voss couldn't frame this as a power move by a superior officer using rank after the fact. Andre had actually done the opposite. He'd given Voss all the room in the world to treat him properly, and Voss had used that room to expose himself. One command-level memo summed up the problem in plain terms. Voss had treated personal suspicion like probable cause, and then tried to write the stop backward into legality after the fact. That was it. That was the whole case. The badge gave him authority. He supplied the misconduct himself. By the end of the week, the review file was no longer about corrective training or another warning. That option was dead. The recommendation moved toward termination, loss of police powers during the final process, and full preservation of records in case of outside inquiry. Tyler Voss had spent the stop trying to prove Andre Bennett did not belong in that vehicle. Now the department was preparing to prove Voss did not belong in uniform. The department moved quickly because it had no safe way to defend Tyler Voss. The stop was bad. The search was worse. The report made it final. Command reviewed the footage, the complaint history, and the administrative interview. Voss had already been warned before about aggressive stops and weak search justifications. This time, the evidence was too clean. He had ignored valid documents, extended the stop without legal grounds, searched the vehicle without probable cause, and then tried to write it up like the facts supported him. They stripped him of his badge and terminated him. The department also had to deal with the public side. Once word got out that the driver was Andre Bennett, the head of internal affairs, the story spread fast. Not because of his title alone, because people understood the bigger point right away. If an officer would do that to a command officer with valid documents, cameras rolling and witnesses nearby, then regular people had probably been getting the same treatment for years, with less protection and less proof. That was the real damage. The bystander video circulated first. Then local outlets picked up the story. Then the department had to answer the question it hates most. Why was this officer still on the street after earlier complaints raised the same issues? That forced changes. Command ordered a review of Voss's prior stops. Supervisors were told to tighten review of consent searches and stop extensions. Internal affairs flagged similar complaints for re-examination. Training got updated, but more important than training, supervisors were put on notice. Weak probable cause language was no longer going to slide just because an officer knew how to dress it up in a report. Andre kept his response controlled all the way through. He didn't make speeches. He didn't turn it into a public performance. He gave his statement, protected the record, and let the evidence do the work. That's why the ending hit as hard as it did. Tyler Voss thought the badge would carry his suspicion. It didn't. The video showed the truth. His history backed it up. His own report buried him. And the department had no choice but to make him the example. One stop, one bad decision chain. One officer convinced his instinct mattered more than the law. That cost him everything. What would you have done in Andre Bennett's place? Have you ever seen a stop go bad because an officer decided suspicion was enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with somebody who needs to see it, and subscribe for more.
Who does this vehicle belong to?
You've already got me out of the car. What exactly are you stopping me for now?
I'm looking at a vehicle that doesn't sit right.
That is not a legal reason.
You're not helping yourself.
I'm standing here
Where'd you get it?
cooperating.
Assigned
Well,
by
tell
who?
me what to do.
Then stop saying stolen before you've checked anything.
I'm seeing.
A sheriff's deputy thought he had an easy arrest in front of him. He was wrong. He pulled over a black woman in a government SUV, decided the vehicle might be stolen, and started treating her like a suspect before he had his facts straight. He talked over her. He ignored procedure. He pushed the stop harder every minute. What he didn't know was simple. The woman behind the wheel was Renee Talbot, a high-ranking FBI director. By the time he realized that, the damage was already done. Bodycam was running, witnesses were watching. His own report was about to fall apart. Stay with this one. It started as a roadside stop and turned into a federal problem fast. Before we get into it, drop where you're watching from. City, state, country, wherever. And if you watch these stories for the power shift, the bad judgment, And the moment officials realized they picked the wrong person, hit like and subscribe. Renee Talbot wasn't local. She had been in the county for a public safety coordination meeting and was driving back toward Atlanta in an FBI-issued SUV. She was 47, black, disciplined, and used to pressure. She had spent years inside federal law enforcement and had reached a level where she didn't need to prove anything to roadside ego. She knew policy. She knew constitutional limits. She knew exactly how a legitimate stop should sound in the first 30 seconds. This one didn't sound right from the start. The deputy was Owen Grady, mid-30s, sheriff's office. Too comfortable with his own authority. He had been working a highway corridor that locals already complained about. Same pattern over and over. Aggressive traffic stops, weak explanations, a lot of suspicious vehicle language, a lot of black drivers saying the same thing later. The stop had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with fishing. That evening, Talbot exited onto a state route near a gas station and strip of service roads. Grady pulled out behind her and stayed there long enough to make it clear he was watching her before he hit the lights. She pulled over cleanly. He walked up already charged up. Not calm, not neutral. He opened with a lane violation, then almost immediately drifted into a different theory. He said the SUV fit indicators tied to possible auto theft. That was a serious claim. The problem was that he had nothing solid to support it. He hadn't confirmed the vehicle was stolen. He hadn't tied it to a bolo. He hadn't described a clear equipment issue. He had a black woman in a federal-style SUV and decided that was enough to start pushing. Talbot gave him what the law required: license, basic compliance. Nothing extra. Grady didn't stay with the traffic stop. He started pressing her about where she got the vehicle, who it belonged to, where she was coming from, and why she seemed nervous. She wasn't nervous. He needed her to be nervous, because that would help him sell the stop later. That's how weak stops usually work. The officer starts with something thin, then tries to build suspicion out of tone, hesitation, silence, or presence. Grady was doing all of it. Talbot stayed calm and asked him to clarify the reason for the stop. He didn't tighten his explanation. He widened it. Said he was seeing inconsistencies. Said her answers weren't helping. Said the vehicle issue was now his main concern. He was trying to move from roadside stop to suspected felony without carrying the evidence needed to justify that jump. He also made a big mistake early. He acted like her questions were disrespect. They weren't. They were basic. But once he decided she wasn't going to shrink for him, his tone changed. He stopped sounding like an officer checking facts and started sounding like a man trying to win a control battle. Talbot noticed every piece of it. She noticed he never gave a stable basis for the stop. She noticed he kept switching between traffic enforcement and theft suspicion. She noticed he was talking more than he was listening. She noticed he was trying to force pressure into the stop instead of procedure. She also knew she was being watched through a racial lens. That part was obvious. A black woman in a newer government SUV on a county road was enough for him to assume criminality before verification. If she'd looked different, there's a strong chance the stop never would have gone this way. Cars kept passing. A couple of people at the gas station across the road had started paying attention. One woman had her phone up. That mattered later. Grady asked if there were weapons in the vehicle. That question by itself wasn't unusual. The way he used it was, he wasn't securing a stop. He was stacking pressure. He wanted a bigger reason to search. He wanted her to say something he could twist. Talbot gave him a controlled answer and kept it tight. He then told her to step out. At that point, he was leaning hard into the stolen vehicle angle. He said the SUV might be unlawfully possessed and suggested she needed to stop making things difficult. He was saying, possible grand theft auto now, like he had already proven it. He hadn't. He was guessing out loud and using the badge to cover the gap. That's the part that wrecked him. Not just the stop, the confidence. He acted like accusation was evidence. Talbot asked for his name and badge number. He gave it, but his tone got worse. Then he called for backup. That call would later matter because dispatch audio captured how quickly he escalated the stop and how little actual information he had. Grady asked again who owned the SUV. Talbot told him, in a measured way, that the vehicle was federally assigned. He didn't accept that. He treated it like a Dodge. He told her people made claims like that all the time. That line aged badly. She reached into her bag slowly and told him she had official identification. He told her to keep her hands where he could see them, then let her retrieve it after another warning. He was still talking like he had a car thief in front of him. Then she handed over the credentials. Not a local pass, not a generic work ID. FBI credentials. Grady looked down, saw the seal, saw the name, saw the title. Renee Talbot, Executive Assistant Director. He froze for a second. Not long, just long enough. Everything changed right there. His voice dropped, his posture changed, the theft talk stopped, the hard edge disappeared. He suddenly wanted the stop to sound routine. He suddenly wanted patience. He suddenly wanted a reset that didn't exist anymore. Talbot didn't help him. She stayed calm and asked if his body camera was active. Then she asked whether his supervisor was on the way. Now he knew what had happened. He hadn't just made a bad stop. He had accused a senior federal official of grand theft auto on no solid basis, ignored federal credentials until it was too late, and done it while escalating a stop that already looked contaminated by profiling. Backup was coming. A supervisor was coming. And the deputy who thought he had found an easy roadside bust was standing there realizing he might have just ended his own career. Supervisor Wade Kerr arrived a few minutes later. Deputy Grady handed him the credentials. Kerr looked at them, looked at Talbot, and understood the problem right away. This was not an ordinary driver. This was a senior FBI official, and the stop had already gone too far. Grady tried to fix it. He stopped talking about grand theft auto. He stopped acting like the SUV was stolen. His tone changed completely. Now he wanted the stop to sound routine. Just a quick check. Just caution. Just a misunderstanding. It was too late for that. Talbot stayed calm. She asked if both body cameras were recording. She asked for their full names and badge numbers. She asked whether the original reason for the stop and the theft accusation would both appear in the report. Those questions put pressure on both deputies. Kerr tried to settle it down. He said they could clear it up and move on. He said Grady had just been careful. He said there had been theft concerns in the area. Talbot didn't accept that. She pointed out the problem clearly. Grady had given more than one reason for the stop. He had escalated to a stolen vehicle accusation before verifying anything. He had treated her like a suspect first and checked facts later. That was the key issue. Then she gave them the vehicle paperwork. It matched. The SUV was federally assigned. There was no theft report, no conflict, no real basis for the accusation. That stripped the stop down to what it really was, a weak stop, a fast escalation, a deputy who guessed wrong and pushed anyway. Kerr saw it. He changed his wording too. He stopped defending the theft claim and started talking about review and procedure. That usually means one thing. The roadside stop is over, and the paperwork problem is starting. Talbot asked for the case number. Kerr gave it to her. She then told him the stop would be formally reported and all footage, dispatch audio, and written records needed to be preserved. That landed hard. Grady barely spoke after that. He knew the stop had collapsed. A few minutes earlier, he had been acting like he controlled the scene. Now he was standing there, hoping the damage would stop growing. It didn't. Talbot left the scene and documented everything that night. Timeline, statements, reason changes, theft accusation, credential reveal, supervisor response, evidence sources. By the next morning, the stop was no longer just a local mistake. It was becoming a federal case. The county tried to contain it the next morning. The sheriff's office announced an administrative review and treated the stop like a normal complaint. That didn't hold. Too much evidence already existed, and too many people had seen the shift in Grady's behavior once he read Talbot's credentials. Federal officials moved quickly. They sent preservation notices for everything tied to the stop: bodycam footage, dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS records, supervisor notes, any report written that night, any message sent between deputies, supervisors, or command staff after the stop ended. That changed the stakes. Now, the issue is not only whether Grady made a bad stop, the issue is whether he made it without a valid basis, escalated it without evidence, and treated Talbot as a criminal because she was a black woman in a government SUV. The footage hurt him immediately. It showed him changing reasons for the stop. He started with a traffic claim, then shifted into suspicion, then jumped to a possible stolen vehicle accusation. He did not verify the theft claim before using it as pressure. That was the main problem. He acted first and looked for support later. The written report made things worse. It softened his language. It cleaned up the stop. It made him sound more careful than he had been on camera. Investigators noticed the gap right away. That raised a second question. Not just misconduct, truthfulness. Internal Affairs then pulled Grady's older stops. That opened another door. They found the same pattern more than once. Weak reasons, broad suspicion language, fast escalation, long questioning that had little to do with the original stop. Black drivers appeared in that pattern again and again. One stop can be defended as a mistake. A pattern is harder to explain. Supervisor Kerr had his own problem. He had a chance to correct the stop on scene once the facts were clear. He didn't do it. He tried to smooth it over and move on. Investigators saw that as a supervisor protecting a deputy instead of protecting the process. Then the DOJ stepped in harder. Subpoenas went out for stop data, complaint files, body cam retention records, training records, and internal communications from Grady's unit. The investigation widened beyond one deputy. Federal reviewers wanted to know whether the sheriff's office had allowed this kind of policing to continue for years. That's when the department's first defense collapsed. At first, a command staff said Grady acted in good faith. They said he was cautious. They said he had reasonable concerns. The evidence did not support that version. The video showed escalation without verification. The dispatch audio showed no confirmed theft basis before the accusation. The witness videos showed his whole tone changing after he learned who Talbot was. That contrast destroyed the local narrative: aggressive before the reveal, careful after. Investigators understood what that meant. Grady had not suddenly become professional. He had realized the person he targeted knew the law, knew the system, and could document every failure. By the end of that week, the stop was no longer a local embarrassment. It had become a federal civil rights investigation into one deputy, one supervisor, and one sheriff's office that looked far too comfortable with stops like this. And the county knew the worst part. Talbot had not exposed them by making a speech. She had exposed them by staying calm, preserving the evidence, and letting their own records tell the story. The fallout hid in layers. First came Grady. Internal Affairs finished its first review and found the stop was not supported the way he claimed. He had used shifting reasons, escalated to a stolen vehicle accusation without verification, and changed his story in the written report. That alone was enough to sink him. Then investigators added the larger issue. The stop showed signs of profiling, not just bad judgment, biased judgment. He was pulled from duty, then fired. That still wasn't the end. The State Certification Board reviewed the case after the federal findings moved forward. Once they saw the footage, the report problems, and the stop history pattern, they moved to strip his law enforcement certification. That meant he did not just lose one job. He lost the ability to keep working as an officer. Kerr was next. He was not the one who started the stop, but he helped turn a bad stop into a department problem. He had facts in front of him and chose to protect the deputy first. Investigators call that a failure of supervision and a failure to intervene. He was disciplined, removed from field oversight and later forced out. Then the department itself took the bigger hit. The DOJ did not treat the stop as one isolated event. The records showed too much: complaint histories, stop data, camera reviews, internal messages. The picture was ugly. Grady's unit had a pattern. Black drivers were being stopped on weak grounds more often than the department wanted to admit. Supervisors were signing off on reports that cleaned up shaky stops after the fact. Training existed on paper, but enforcement was weak. That is what turned one stop into a federal civil rights case. The county had to sign an oversight agreement. That came with outside monitoring, stop data audits, stricter body cam retention rules, and mandatory review of stops based on broad suspicion claims. Deputies could no longer rely on vague language and expect it to slide through. If they said a vehicle looked suspicious, they had to explain why in detail and match it to actual facts. Supervisors had to review those stops faster and more closely. The county also had to change traffic stop procedure. Officers were required to document the original reason for every stop before expanding it. If they shifted from a traffic matter to a criminal suspicion, they had to show when that happened and what facts justified it. That sounds basic. It should have already been happening. It wasn't. Talbot filed a civil rights claim too. That part mattered because it forced the county to answer in court, not just in press statements. Her case focused on unlawful detention, profiling, and the false criminal accusation. The county settled after the evidence became too strong to fight cleanly. The amount got attention, but the bigger issue was the admission built into the settlement. They paid because they knew the stop could not survive full public review. Talbot handled the aftermath the same way she handled the stop: calm, precise, no grandstanding. She did not build her credibility by being emotional. She built it by documenting everything, preserving the evidence, and refusing to let the department rewrite what happened. That was the real power shift. Grady thought the badge on his chest decided the scene. It didn't. Facts did. Records did. Video did. Once those locked in, his authority meant nothing. That's the lesson here. A lot of bad stops survive because the person targeted is isolated, stressed, or unsure of the rules. Grady counted on that. He thought he could control the roadside, control the language, and control the report. He ran into someone who knew exactly what he was doing and knew how to make it follow him back to the office. That ended his career. It also changed the county. Not because the department wanted to reform, because exposure forced it. By 2026, the Talbot stop was being cited in training discussions, policy reviews, and police accountability debates well outside that county. Not because an FBI director got pulled over, because the stop showed the whole pattern in one clean sequence: weak reason, fast escalation, false accusation, tone change after status reveal. Then the paperwork cleanup attempt. It was all there. And once people saw it, nobody could pretend they didn't understand what had happened. That deputy thought he had found an easy target. He found the worst possible person to test with a bad stop. What do you think would have happened if Talbot had been an ordinary driver with no rank, no federal access, and no way to lock down the evidence that fast? A lot of people already know that answer. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who follows